you again for joining the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC Management Plan and EA virtual public meeting. I would like to introduce Shauna Duman, BLM Las Vegas Office Field Manager, who will initiate the meeting.
Hi, and welcome to the meeting. My name is Shauna Duman, and I'm the Field Manager for the Bureau of Land Management's Las Vegas Field Office, and I want to thank you for coming tonight. We will be presenting on the Piute-Eldorado Valley Area of Critical Environmental Concern, also known as an ACEC, Management Plan and Associated Draft Environmental Assessment. The ACEC plan will assist in guiding our management of this important area for the next 20 years. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to hearing your input. Next slide, please. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to present information about the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC Management Plan and the Draft Environmental Assessment, to answer your questions and to hear your comments. For the agenda, I will introduce you to the team working on the project. Then we will go over some logistics about the meeting, have a presentation by the project manager with background, a summary of the proposed actions and next steps. Then we will go into a question and answer session. And finally, we will have a public comment period. We will close the meeting out at 8 p.m. Also, please be aware that the meeting is being recorded and will be available for later for viewing on YouTube. Next slide, please. In the meeting today, we have our project manager, JJ Smith, who will be giving the presentation and answering questions live. He is supported by an interdisciplinary team with Jimmy Linares, Evan Myers, Braden Gard, Lee Kirk, and Steve Leslie, who will be helping to answer questions in writing. Jared Kemper with ECM and Susie Morales with Recon are the contractors assisting BLM with this project, and they are handling the logistics of tonight's meeting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Susie to go over the meeting logistics. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Shauna. Good evening. My name is Susie Morales with Recon Environmental, and I will be providing you with information on the logistics for this virtual meeting. Your microphones and video will be turned off during the presentation. During the question and answer period after the presentation, please enter your questions in the Q&A box. All questions will be entered in writing, and we will read out the questions as we get to them. The chat box is reserved for technical questions about Zoom or other technical issues. After the presentation and Q&A session, we will begin the virtual comment session. Virtual comments will be received by pre-registrants first who indicated they would like to provide a comment. Then we will provide an opportunity for other participants to comment. Please refrain from use of inappropriate language. This meeting will be recorded for the project record, and all materials presented today will be made available online. Next slide, please. In case you have not used Zoom previously, use the Q&A icon for the question and answer session. Use the chat icon only for urgent technical questions. Use the raised hand feature during the public comment session. Mute and unmute will be controlled by the host during the meeting. For phone callers, use *9 to raise your hand to ask a question or provide a comment. For technical assistance, contact Jared at the email or phone number shown on the slide. JJ Smith will now provide the presentation on the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC Management Plan and Associated EA. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you, Susie, and thank you everyone for attending tonight's meeting. A little background on the project. The BLM designates areas of critical environmental concern, or ACECs, where special management attention is needed to protect important resource values. In the case of the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC, the listing of the Mojave Desert tortoise as threatened under the Endangered Species Act and the need to protect that species and its habitat was the impetus for designating the ACEC. This happened back in 1998 with the Las Vegas Resource Management Plan. More recently, several things have caused BLM to develop a plan of action specifically for this ACEC. One of those things was the selection of the ACEC as a mitigation recipient site for the unavoidable environmental impacts caused by solar energy development. Basically, environmental impacts to resources including vegetation, soils, and wildlife within the Dry Lake Solar Energy Zone could not be addressed on that site. So the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC was selected as an alternative place to offset some of those environmental impacts by making some commensurate improvements to soils, vegetation, wildlife habitat, and other resources. Next slide, please. A quick orientation. On the map to the left, you can see the irregular shape of the Piute-Eldorado Valley ACEC in green down in the far southern portion of Nevada. Now, if you shift your attention to the map on the right, you can see the ACEC enlarged, also in green. Notice that there's a large sort of donut hole around the town of Searchlight. And then there's another of these holes to the northwest, or the upper right of Searchlight. This is the Highland Range crucial bighorn habitat area that was excluded when the ACEC was designated because it's not tourist habitat. Now, surrounding the ACEC is a lot of public land managed by BLM, but which is not part of the ACEC. Also, a lot of land managed by the National Park Service, which is in light blue, and then a patchwork of private land in white. Next slide, please. So the environmental assessment is used to analyze the environmental effects of a proposed action on public land. In this case, the proposed action is the list of activities in the ACEC management plan. The EA also analyzes and discloses the environmental effects of any alternative actions, including the impact of not implementing the proposed action or the projects in the ACEC management plan. The EA is also intended to help public officials make decisions that are based on the understanding of environmental consequences and to take actions that can protect, restore, and enhance the environment. This part of the NEPA process is designed to encourage and facilitate public involvement in the decisions that affect the quality of the human environment as well. It's also important to note that the environmental assessment is for the ACEC management plan only. The plan is a way to pursue the objectives of the 1998 Las Vegas Resource Management Plan within the ACEC, not to amend that resource management plan. Next slide, please. Okay, the actions proposed in the ACEC management plan can be grouped into a few categories: reducing landscape fragmentation, improving wildlife habitat quality and connectivity, improving the condition of soils and vegetation, enhancing the visual or scenic quality of the ACEC, and developing sustainable recreation opportunities, public outreach, and education programs. Next slide. For reducing landscape fragmentation, the environmental assessment analyzes projects that address some long overdue route maintenance issues, including modifying one designated open route to deal with the deteriorated Loran Station Road, which you can see in this photo. The plan also includes the restoration of linear disturbances, where people have driven off of this designated route network and created new paths across the desert, contributing to fragmentation of the desert landscape and other environmental problems. Next slide, please. All right, let's take a closer look at the ACEC route network. Routes within the ACEC were designated as either open or closed in the 1998 Las Vegas Resource Management Plan. Now, at that time, about 425 miles of routes were designated as open to motorized vehicular travel. An additional 118 miles were designated as closed. The ACEC management plan does not propose any changes to this designation. So any future changes to the route network would require a separate public planning process. The only proposed action related to an open route in the ACEC management plan is a modification to that Loran Station Road that I showed in the previous slide. And that's just to remove the old asphalt that's badly deteriorating and realign the road with drainage crossings to deal with some erosion and sedimentation issues. Otherwise, the primary maintenance issues with the route network are related to designated closed routes. Of the 118 miles of routes designated as closed in 1998, about 100 of those miles appear to be driven on recently or even currently. The ACEC management plan proposes several activities to address this, including updating and maintaining signs for the open routes so the visitors know for sure that they're driving on a designated open route. And where needed, signs would also be used to mark the closed routes on the ground. And there would also be a few information kiosks put at intersections to inform visitors about the designated route network. Also a long-term monitoring and maintenance plan for the signs, as well as focused ranger patrols are going to be developed. And just having someone out there day to day, checking on the routes, replacing damaged signs, raking out motorcycle tracks, having face-to-face visitor contacts, those things will help a lot in helping people know where the open routes are. And then finally, in some cases, we'll need to restore these closed routes. So if we can go to the next slide. Here's an example of a restoration treatment called vertical mulching, where a youth conservation crew came in and planted native plants along with a lot of dead sticks and branches and other material found on the site to begin to revegetate the closed route and also to visually repair the site so that someone just casually driving by doesn't notice it and feel compelled to drive on it. Now, a few challenging sites may require heavier equipment to decompact soils, for example, or in place barriers such as boulders or fencing to keep people from reopening one of these closed routes as it's in recovery. Next slide, please. The same restoration techniques are proposed for the restoration of disturbances, including linear disturbances caused by people driving off of this designated route network and out into the surrounding desert. In 2019, we identified 535 miles of these linear disturbances. A few were older that have begun, slowly healing on their own, but almost 90% appear from satellite images to have some evidence of being driven on currently or recently. And about 3/4 of these disturbances are classified as single track caused by motorcycles. Next slide, please. In addition to restoring closed routes and restoring these linear disturbances, the environmental assessment analyzes a few other activities specifically to improve wildlife habitat. One project would be to install wildlife fences along the larger paved roads in the ACEC as a way to reduce wildlife roadkill. But fences fragment habitat, at least for some species, unless they're connected to safe places where wildlife can cross beneath the road. Over 40 wildlife species, including desert tortoises, use culverts to cross beneath roadways. So the ACEC management plan recommends making use of these by tying existing or new wildlife fences into those culverts, as shown by this yellow fence line in the bottom right picture. The plan also recommends relocating and adding several miles of additional fencing, modifying culverts that block or can even entrap wildlife, as well as working with our partners to maintain culverts for wildlife use, or possibly even adding some specific wildlife culverts or crossings. A lot of this work would be focused on the Nipton Road. Next slide, please. A few projects are proposed to restore areas where soil and vegetation have been damaged by past land uses, including past mining, for example. Many of the same restoration techniques that I mentioned earlier would be used for these types of disturbances. And there are also a few springs in and adjacent to the ACEC that were modified in the past and are currently being heavily impacted by feral or estray cattle in the nearby, coming out of the nearby McCullough Mountains. These cattle are affecting the water quality as well as the quantity and the vegetation surrounding the springs. So the ACEC management plan calls for removing trash, old piping, except for anything that's culturally significant, treating invasive weeds where necessary, a little sediment management in places to ensure that wildlife can safely access the water, and most importantly, the removal of these feral cattle, which would be a joint effort with state agencies. Next slide, please. A number of other activities included in the ACEC management plan would be to include the improve the visual quality of the ACEC. And these include removing graffiti, using rock stain to disguise disturbed areas while they heal, and the removal of trash. These types of activities almost always benefit wildlife and other natural resource values at the same time. Next slide, please. And finally, the development of a strategy for sustained public outreach and an education program is being proposed in the ACEC management plan. These activities include the focused ranger patrols that I mentioned earlier, increases in visitor contacts, collecting visitor use data so that we can respond more quickly to changes in recreation patterns, and following an established communication plan tailored to this specific area in this specific ACEC. Next slide, please. The environmental analysis that we did points out that some of these activities, including fencing, restoration of linear disturbances, modifying the lower end road, and other proposed activities will cause some temporary disturbance that will need to be monitored and addressed. But longer term, the actions would produce a much larger beneficial impact to natural resources. And our preliminary findings in the EA are that we would meet the goals of the Dry Lake Solar Energy Zone Mitigation Implementation Plan, and that we would be taking appropriate steps towards the goals of the Las Vegas Resource Management Plan, as well as the Desert Tortoise Recovery Plan. Next slide, please. Okay, a little on where we go from here. Starting in the upper left, we had several pre-NEPA meetings to gather input to develop a draft ACEC management plan. Here in the blue, we incorporated a lot of your feedback and analyzed the new draft plan in this current environmental analysis. And now we're here in the center, bottom bubble, in the middle of a 30-day review of the draft environmental assessment. So we'll begin reviewing and addressing comments as soon as the comment period closes on later this month on April 19th, and move toward a signed decision if there are no significant impact findings. Implementation then would begin after an appeal period. With that, I will turn it back over to Susie to get our question and answer session going. So thank you for your attention. Next slide, please.
Thank you, JJ. The question and answer period will be approximately 30 minutes. You can provide a question by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Type your question and press the send button. Please only submit your question once. Wait for BLM to answer your question live or in writing. The BLM staff will answer your question in the chat box or verbally on video. BLM will answer your questions as quickly as possible, but it may take a few minutes for them to process the question and provide an answer. Don't use the chat button to submit a question, only use the Q&A button. This is your opportunity to ask specific questions regarding the ACEC and management plan. Please note that the BLM will not answer questions during the comment period. The approximately 60-minute public comment period will follow the question and answer period. JJ Smith, project manager, will be responding to some questions live. A team of BLM specialists will be responding to some questions in writing. We look forward to your questions. We have a question. What are the benefits of the proposed action?
Thank you, Susie. Well, there are a lot, but let me just say the proposed activities that we analyzed in the EA will they'll improve the conditions of a lot of natural resources, including foremost the protection of the Mojave Desert tortoise. These are, a federally threatened species, and that's why the ACEC was created, for the protection of that species. The benefits of conservation and restoration also extend, of course, to the human environment. Properly functioning ecosystems that are resistant to disturbances and resilient to change will continue to provide benefits for the natural environment, but also they'll provide a high quality recreation experience or opportunities for activities in the ACEC, like hiking, camping, hunting, wildlife watching, horseback riding, and off-highway vehicle travel on those designated routes. So thanks for the question.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question. Will the area be closed or open to certain activities?
Thanks, Susie. That's a good question. The allowable activities in the ACEC will remain as they were outlined in the 1998 Resource Management Plan. And these include a lot of those recreational activities that I just mentioned, things like camping and hunting and horseback riding and so forth, and including off-highway vehicle use on the designated routes. There are some restrictions that were put in place in 1998 that will also remain, and those include things like the size and the timing of recreational events. So there are no speed events in the ACEC because of the risk that would pose to little baby tortoises out there. And the area will remain closed to energy development, for example, new mineral developments, those sorts of things. So no changes are proposed in this ACEC management plan. It would all be like it has been for the last 20 years.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question. Is there a plan for expansion of the ACEC in the future?
So this environmental assessment doesn't analyze any changes to the size of the ACEC. Expanding or contracting the ACEC is a resource management plan decision, and that would require a separate public planning process. The ACEC management plan does make a few recommendations for addressing some boundary discrepancies, very small acres where we have gaps and slivers between administrative boundaries that are misaligned. So correcting these are part of are one of the recommendations of the ACEC management plan, but no large resource management plan type of changes are proposed. Thanks for that. Good question.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question. What is the difference between existing routes and designated routes?
Yeah, these terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but there's an important distinction. Routes that are designated as open are the only ones that are officially open for motorized travel. There are other routes that people might call existing, tracks and things that may look like roads on the ground, but these are usually either roads that were officially closed, but are now being used again, maybe accidentally because the sign fell down, or something like that, or they've just been created. One person drives out across the desert, the next person sees that and drives on it, and pretty soon, people just think, hey, that looks like a good place to drive, and starts to look like an existing road, but it's a disturbance. Yeah, thanks. Good question.
Thank you, JJ. It looks like we have a new attendee. I just want you to know that we're in the question and answer period. You can click the Q&A button on your screen if you'd like to ask a question, and BLM will answer it either live or in writing. We have a new question. What is BLM going to do about vandalism in the area?
Yeah, that has been a concern. The ACEC management plan recommends several different activities to address vandalism, including more monitoring to help identify any newly vandalized areas quickly, trash and graffiti cleanup events. Those will help to demonstrate a kind of a consistent management presence in the area by staff. And again, this is to show people that they're, we're out there managing, doing things. And so, don't trash the place. And then focused ranger patrols, really to address some key places where we know we've had some vandalism in the past.
Thank you, JJ. We have another question. Why is BLM doing this ACEC management plan now?
So the designation of the ACEC, as I mentioned in the presentation, and also the setting of what are the allowable land uses, those all happened back in 1998, and they were designed to help protect the desert tortoise and its habitat, specifically to do things like lower vehicle related tortoise mortality or roadkill. But invasive plants, wildfire risk, we still have areas where wildlife mortality along unfenced sections of major roads. And then we have these extensive off-route, 535 miles of off-route travel. Those continue to pose, management challenges. And these need to be addressed if we're to meet the conservation objectives of our resource management plan. Also, with the selection of the ACEC as a dry lake solar energy zone mitigation recipient site, and also the award of a Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act grant or project to Clark County, these represent opportunities to perform conservation work out on the ACEC. So, we now have the opportunity to collaborate and to fund a lot of conservation projects in the area.
Thank you, JJ. We've had the Q&A session for about 10 minutes. We still have some time, so please ask your questions. We do thank you for your patience while questions are being sent in and BLM works on responses. We have another question, JJ. Why wouldn't locals see this as weak or real on-the-ground conservation actions for critical habitat on our public lands? What can BLM point to beyond monitoring and patrols?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a good one. And let me start, I guess, by saying the patrols, I think, are probably one of those actions that it is hard to quantify the actual impact of those. You know, you're gonna see what the output is, which is more visitor contacts or some other metric used to as sort of a proxy for understanding what the actual impact on conservation is. Some of the other actions will be the same. How many miles of wildlife fencing are put up? How many acres of disturbed area are improved? So I think we have to interpret, what that means. However, the monitoring part of the plan is going to include not just looking at some of those metrics of output, but also looking at the specific ecological impacts. So some of the monitoring includes things like looking at populations of species that we know are very important for tortoise forage. It's the food they eat, or it's the shrubs that they use to build their burrows beneath. Those sorts of elements in their habitat that are required for them to survive. So there will be in the monitoring some very specific metrics that come out of this that show just exactly how much habitat has been improved or other conservation measures have been achieved. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, JJ. We'll pause for a bit to see if we get any additional questions. We thank you again for your patience while questions are sent and BLM works on responses. We have another question, JJ. Follow up, but BLM admits it struggles with monitoring?
Yes, we admit that. Monitoring is often very difficult to explain the value of. I hope I did an okay job of it in that last answer of explaining why it's important to do. So it is often hard to get funding and to be able to do as much monitoring as we would like. Fortunately, the ACEC management plan, I think, is the way of making sure that the monitoring is funded over a sufficient period of time, and that the monitoring takes place in a robust, scientifically grounded way, so that we can actually capture what the effects are of the work we're doing. The fact that some of the funding comes from mitigation means that we are accountable for making sure that we achieve the improvements to resource values for those resources that were impacted by the solar energy development. So there's an added layer of sort of accountability there for our monitoring effort, because we have to show quantitatively that we're improving those resources.
Thank you, JJ. Just to let the attendees know, we still have about 15 minutes. If you have any additional questions. We'll wait a couple more minutes to see if any additional questions come in. And if not, we'll move on to the public comment period. And please know that if you have any questions or comments that you would like to provide in writing, you can provide those via the BLM's project e-planning site, and we'll provide those website addresses for you. Looks like we have another question from Dan Patterson. Does BLM plan to prevent disposal, privatization of any public lands within the ACEC? Is BLM involved with Congress on the Clark County Lands Bill?
So we don't have any plans or to do anything about privatization or disposal. We don't really have a role in that. And the same with the Clark County lands bill. That's nothing that we're involved with. So we're watching that, but we don't have any involvement in those activities.
I just wanted to remind folks that that the BLM will not answer questions during the comment period. So if you do have any questions, please provide them now. If we don't see any additional questions, we might proceed on to the comment period, but we'll wait a couple more minutes. My apologies. BLM will answer questions in the chat during the comment period, but they won't be providing verbal responses. We'll go ahead and give you a last call for questions. Please let us know if you have any questions. And again, BLM will respond to questions in the chat during the comment period, but not verbally. I don't see any further questions remaining, so we'll go ahead and proceed to the comment period. And thank you, JJ, for your valued responses. Next slide, please. The public comment period will be approximately 60 minutes. Comments will be accepted in the order of registration. Once your name is called, please use the raise hand feature and the forum facilitator will open your microphone. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand with *9. A timer will be displayed on your screen to show the time remaining for your input. Your input will be included in the project record. Next slide, please. BLM wants to hear from all members of the public. Out of respect for everyone's participation and input, we will be using the following guidelines. We ask that you please stay within your allotted comment time so that everyone has an opportunity to speak and provide their comments. Please be respectful of others and please refrain from profanity. If time allows, you will be provided with an additional opportunity to comment. If guidelines are not followed, your microphones will be muted and we will move to the next commenter. The following information would provide the most useful type of comments. Is there additional information, data, or analysis which should be considered? Is information, data, or analysis incorrect or not thoroughly considered? Next slide, please. Normally, we would call out a list of commenters, but we did not have any participants that indicated during registration for the virtual meeting that they would wish to provide a comment. So we will open the comment session to anyone who would like to comment. Please use the raised hand feature to let us know you would like to comment and we will unmute your microphone. Please also unmute the microphone on your end. And if you decide you didn't want to provide verbal comments, but would like to provide some input, please visit the project website for more information. And the project website is shown at the bottom of your screen. The meeting will stay open until 8 p.m. in case you are thinking about comments or would like to provide something for the BLM to consider. BLM appreciates your participation and input and thanks you for your time this evening. We'll leave the comment period open until 8. But if we don't see any raised hands, we'll go to our final slide. We'll give you a few more minutes. We'll go ahead and move on, but please note that you can provide comments in writing via the website you see at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. Shauna Duman, Field Manager, will go ahead and close this evening's presentation, but please note that the comment period will be open until 8 p.m.
Thanks, Susie. I think Shauna had to step out here, so I'll just, on behalf of BLM and our consulting team, I'd like to just thank everybody for your participation tonight. And remind you that you can still provide written comments by visiting the ePlanning website at the address shown on this slide, or also by email or regular mail from now until April the 19th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JJ. And again, just a reminder that the comment period will be open until 8 p.m. And again, BLM appreciates your participation, input,